Talking Uber ahead of their earnings, of course, the stock is up 8% since their IPO in May, which is, decent. They're still on this path to profitability we talk about a lot with these companies, but I have a personal bone to pick with Uber because
hold on. Stop the show.
Because as of the beginning of January, they have this, this is not Uber's fault, but it's Chicago's fault.
Tax?
We have this city tax. So now my Ubers cost on average $2 to $3 extra a ride, which if you're a heavy Uber user like me, it's like $30 extra a week.
Suddenly your Uber bill is going to look like a car payment.
Exactly. So then all of a sudden I'm thinking,
and you're getting to the inflection point where it might be
should I buy a car? And I'm thinking I must not be alone in this, but then I was researching this morning and only 12% of all the Uber's users Uber more than twice a week. Only 12%. I thought that was the craziest thing. So I must be alone in this and I must be Ubering too much. But
we're talking about Uber, or as Jenny Horn refers to as her driver. My driver.
Or all my whole
rude
bank account, I think.
Yeah.
It seems like this general unhappiness is, I'm not alone in that. I mean, I might be alone in the way I Uber too often, but it seems like people are generally very unhappy with Uber as of lately. So our first tweet is from Ross Gerber, who says, having lots of issues with Uber lately and Uber Eats. Turns out giving drivers more say means the service now sucks. I'm out. I know, I love that. Thanks, Lyft. Lyft for me and some other food delivery service. Any recommendations? So Megan, yesterday with Landon, we talked about how Grubhub is also, extremely unhappy with their users right now, or their users are unhappy with Grubhub. Is that a similar theme with Uber Eats and Uber in general, and are people now switching to Lyft?
Yeah, you really set this up nicely going from Grubhub into this Uber conversation. Whenever we look at sentiment levels, so people using Uber or even using a competitor like Lyft, we see relatively low sentiment. It's a similar trajectory across the board if you kind of compare the two that you're looking at on this chart right here. And so while you can see that Lyft does have a slightly higher happiness level than Uber, it's still on the same path, in that consumers really like to complain about those fees or wait times or anything that could go wrong, especially on Twitter.
Megan, I think this is a company that's about to, it's like a freight train heading for a wall because something's got to give here, right? They either have to get profitable, which I think that's their goal. But if they're going to get profitable, and like Jenny said in Chicago now, they've imposed a tax on that, there's a lot of things going on, but it has to be higher prices for them to get profitable. And higher prices brings in, yes, Economics 101 says competition. And competition means that you're going to be competing with someone saying, wait a minute, if I spend $400 a month on Uber, why don't I just buy a car?
Right.
I think that that's fair. I think that when we look at Uber, a lot of times, like on this chart, we are comparing Uber and Lyft, but it's really hard to compare the two long term because Uber is thinking so much bigger. Whenever you look at purchase intent mentions, there's such a vast difference in how many people are talking about using an Uber service versus a Lyft service. And this is partially just because Uber has so many different facets. They have Uber Eats. They have, I guess both companies have scooters, but they're also exploring Uber Freight. They're also exploring Uber Elevate and all of these different fields, thinking long term how they can move things other than just people, where Lyft might be a little bit more short-sighted, looking at how can we get a human from point A to point B? So long term, we actually like this consumer demand for Uber. We think that them using multiple business points helps create this synergy and create some brand loyalty for the brand, and we're definitely seeing that in data as well.
Another alternative potentially to Kevin's idea of buying a car is just to move closer to wherever your main destination is. You can spend that extra $300 or $400 if you're in an urban area and live close to where you work. But I have a question to you about Uber and Lyft in terms of Uber building out its loyalty program. How much has that maybe impacted people being recurring customers for Uber and a little bit less price sensitive, given now that there's more incentive now to stay with one or the other?
Yeah, two things that we dove into when we looked at this data is we looked at the Uber Rewards and also Uber Pass. And these different programs, they incentivize you to use the service more. And it also allows you to lock in a price. I believe if you're someone like Jenny who's using Uber to take a ride, a similar path, like to and from work, for example. But I do think it's important to note, that like she said, 12% of people use Uber more than 2 times. I don't remember what the time frame was, but I think that that's a common theme, in more suburban areas or, outside of these big metro areas. It's much harder for Uber to even be a legitimate option to and from work or something of that normal basis. So I think that users are still willing to, get that convenience factor of, if they are going to take a trip, maybe they don't want to have to worry about parking, or maybe they don't want to have to be the person behind the wheel, and so there's still a value prop there for these companies.
Yeah, Megan, I totally agree with you, because as much as I was just complaining about the ride tax, I do have to say Uber's loyalty program has kept me from using Lyft, I guess, and just using Uber more because of their loyalty program. Now I have, say, a free Uber Eats delivery every couple months, and I mean, it sounds like nothing, but it does keep me continuing to use Uber over a Lyft. So I do have to say I'm the biggest consumer of these ride-sharing companies. I could not live without them, but unfortunately they do cost you so much money. And Kevin talks about them possibly having to raise prices. I mean, I can't even imagine what that would do for someone like me who's using it so often. But like you mentioned, of course, Uber is more diverse than Lyft. So that actually is a perfect segue into my next tweet, which says, most people think of Uber as a ride-sharing company, but it is much more. Uber Eats, Uber Freight, Uber self-driving car division, Uber Elevates, Uber Health, Uber Bikes, or Jump, and now Uber Workers, a job app for gig economy workers. So this goes into all of the, I didn't even know about half of these things existed, how big a company Uber is. So do you think this is the key to them being profitable long term? Because really, what's going to change for them going forward? They aren't profitable right now. What will make them profitable in the future?
Yeah, I think that that's so key, that they have these diverse arms that they can kind of tap into. We're watching success in Uber Freight. I think on their last report that was up something like 78% year over year of, people and fleets being able to deliver large items other than people themselves. I think that it's really important long term that Uber positions themselves as a logistics company, and that's their path to profitability. I think that they're investing in the right things when it comes to technology and the potential for autonomous driving and things of that nature, but it's definitely a long-term play. Right now, you're looking at a chart of a quarter-over-quarter comparison for the earnings that Uber is about to report, and what we're seeing is about a 19% increase in usage of people talking about using Uber. So that's good, but investors also expect this kind of growth, and they expect this profitability. So from an earnings perspective, our signal is pretty neutral.
Yeah, I'll tell you what's going to change between now and the future for Uber. The price you pay is going to go up, because they have to become profitable.
Right.
Right.
And what's funny is the drivers are also equally as unhappy, because they know they'll lose someone like me or like you that uses Uber and Lyft.
Right.
And the drivers were telling me this ride-sharing tax came out and they've never had less traffic in the morning. So no one's happy about it, whether you're the driver, the consumer.
It's called
Uber's
elasticity of demand. I'm doing a lot of economics 101 today.
I know. I feel like I'm in business class.
Elasticity of demand, which means at some price point you'll stop using it.
But they're still cheaper than the cab alternative. So if you're someone who needs to get to or from,
it doesn't sound cheaper.
It honestly is. I mean, you try to go from the airport to the city, it's $40-50. Going on Uber, it's $25. So it's significantly cheaper, and there's still a lot of room to the upside till those are the same price.
And in full disclosure, the tax is only in effect during business hours. So then on the weekends, the tax is no longer in effect. I figured that out.
So think about that. They're taxing the workers in Chicago to go from. So that in itself is going to be an issue.
Right.
Megan, coming back to that last chart that we were just looking at when we're comparing quarter over quarter, and obviously this is primarily looking at people talking about using Uber for the first time or still continuing to use Uber. With Uber being kind of the verb, or I'm grabbing an Uber, how much does that actually impact the amount of growth you're seeing with Uber maybe versus Lyft? It's got that brand recognition similar to something like Kleenex does in the tissue space.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think that there is an advantage, though, to being that generic name, right? The go-to, let's grab an Uber, let's check an Uber. I think that the key here for us is, we're also watching those loyalty mentions. So those product specific of using the Uber Pass or using Uber, maybe you're using Uber Eats or some type of product specific to tip the hat, and we capture those mentions as well. So I think it's promising that demand is increasing, and I don't think it hurts Uber long term that they are the standard, the go-to.